British senior commanders are considering sending troops to Ukraine on a training mission. A Ukrainian military source told the paper the move would send a powerful message of unity to Russia. I want to get, first of all, the expert thoughts of Keir Giles, who's senior consulting fellow at Chatham House and has been written about this very topic in the past. Welcome to you, Keir.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, so tell me what you think about this. Is this to you encouraging?
Well, it's always encouraging, but then, of course, there's a period of discouragement if it never actually happens. Now, this is not a new suggestion. We might recall at the beginning of the summer when President Macron of France was putting forward a similar idea, and quite a lot more forcefully than actually is being expressed by the UK at the moment.
Yeah.
That was shot down by a horrified reaction by other NATO members.
Yes.
So I don't think it's particularly news that this is under consideration, because it's been under consideration for a very long time, because it's the rational and obvious thing to do. I think the news is more, why hasn't it happened before now?
Yes, I mean the idea was floated, wasn't it, a few months ago by the then Defence Secretary Grant Shapps. At that time, it seemed to sort of peter out to nowhere, and there was at that time a strong reaction. Some commentators thought it would be far too provocative, and so on and so on and so on. But yet here we have senior commanders, general officers, and so on saying that it is under active consideration again, which makes it look like an idea very clearly on the table at the very, very least.
Well, I very much hope that it is under active consideration. But in a way, this isn't really that much of a step forward from where we are already. In that same reporting from the Times this morning, we've seen the discussion of medical training already being provided in Ukraine by British forces,
Yes.
as discussed. And of course, throughout the whole of the conflict, the UK has had a much less timid attitude to dispatching people to Ukraine than, for example, the United States.
Yeah.
There's always been a British military presence there. So there's no doubt whatsoever that Russia will make a lot of this. They'll be described as legitimate military targets. It'll be described as a massive escalation. There'll be dire and blood-curdling threats from Moscow.
Yes.
What we don't want to happen is for that to appear once again to constrain what Western countries can do in support of Ukraine.
Yeah, look, I suppose this move would make UK forces targets for Russian attack. I mean, you mentioned the possibility of medical training, but here we seem to be, from what we read in the Times, talking about training on basic training for troops on their way to the front line, it is a few notches above all of that. It would make them targets, which raises really significant questions again, doesn't it?
Well, making them targets is exactly the language that David Cameron used a few months ago when he was also pouring cold water on this idea from a UK point of view. But calling them just targets is a very passive way of approaching this.
Yeah.
It's like assuming that they are just going to be hostages to Russian attack, as opposed to actually playing some kind of positive role.
Yeah.
And again, that is not what should determine the policy options of the UK trying to support Ukraine.
Right,
now, the ideal situation, of course, which probably wouldn't happen, is the further development of this that's been proposed, that not only is there a physical presence of troops from the coalition of nations backing Ukraine, but also they're able to defend themselves. If they are made targets by Russia, then they ought to have their own means of air defense and actually making sure that they are not vulnerable to Russian attacks.
Yeah.
And that, of course, would have the knock-on effect of making safe areas for Ukraine as well, where you're actually providing coverage not only for those individual groups of foreign soldiers, but also what surrounds them as well.
Yes. Yeah, so having British troops on the ground in a training capacity with their deployments protected by air defence, that does bring into play the possibility of a direct combat ground to air between Britain and Russia. And from what you're saying, do you anticipate to that possibility, there would be serious unease among European partners?
There's bound to be unease. A lot of it stoked by Russia, a lot of it actually natural and intuitive. Certainly the United States, which has been traditionally very timorous about anything which will upset Russia, is likely to be quite hesitant about this idea. You only have to look at the restrictions they've put on their own, not only military forces, but even diplomats moving around in Ukraine, to see just how neuralgic a subject this is for them.
Yeah.
But here, again, you see that it is not the United States, but it is the other members of this coalition backing Ukraine that are demonstrating what is possible and are looking for the most efficient ways of providing that support, sometimes with or without the support of the US.
What is your hunch ultimately on this? Do you believe that this, really in its way, radical proposal will go ahead? What would be your guess, your hunch?
Well, my hunch, my unfortunate suspicion is that once again this will be kicked into the long grass, and this headline will frighten the horses, and there'll be so much opposition to it that it won't actually move forward into practical measures. I would love to be wrong about that.
All right, Keir Giles, really good to get your expert opinion. Keir is the Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House and has discussed and written about this very subject. I'm joined now in the studio by our own political editor on Times Radio, Kate McCann. Welcome to you, Kate.
Hi, John.
It's a pretty eye-catching story, this. The idea has been discussed and floated in the past. This looks like something quite active. What are you picking up on this?
Yeah, I've been speaking to people inside Number 10 and around the Ministry of Defence today because it is, of course, a really important story. It would be a big step forward, this. It has, as you say, been discussed before, and we know that. I've spoken to people in the Ministry of Defence who have confirmed that. They are suggesting, sources there, though, at the moment, that there's no sort of immediate move to do this. Just, I suppose, managing expectations. Now, there's two ways of looking at that. The first is, obviously, this would be a huge operational moment for UK forces, so there would always be a bit of expectation management. There would also always be a bit of caution when it comes to operational deployments and stories that could involve sending British troops to Ukraine, even on a training mission, partly because of the tensions in the region and what kind of message that would send, but also because of the personnel. So, yeah, I think that's the message at the moment from government.
Right, gets us right up to date. Kate McCann, thank you so much. Now let's talk to Lord Dannatt, former head of the British Army. Welcome to you, Lord Dannatt.
Hello, John. Good afternoon.
Hi, good to have you here, Richard. Now tell me, look, what are your thoughts on this plan, this idea, which is in the air here again? It seems quite strongly.
Well, very briefly, with great respect to the Times, it's only a report published in the Times and nothing that's been formally put out by the Ministry of Defence. But what I would say is that if such a deployment is to go ahead, it must be absolutely stressed that this is part of the UK's bilateral arrangements with Ukraine, and nothing to do with NATO itself.
Yes.
But that's a really critical point.
I just develop that a wee bit more because I sort of anticipate what you mean by that. If it was a NATO operation, then first of all, there's a question of why aren't other NATO members supplying troops and joining in this effort? And if that were to happen, well, then as it were, the front becomes wider, and NATO is far more deeply involved as a defence entity.
Yes, all those things are true, but I think look at it from the other side. Putin has been saying all along, this is NATO attacking Russia. If it was to be seen to be a part of a NATO operation, that the British were providing troops to train Ukrainians in Ukraine, this is playing into his narrative. This is NATO attacking Russia.
Yes.
It must be stressed this is part of the UK bilateral arrangement with Ukraine, if indeed it goes ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we see our defence editor at the Times, Larissa Brown, who is very well connected, as you know very well, and she's hearing from the Ukrainian side. They would welcome this. They would see it as an important message, as well as a help for Ukraine's effort to resist the invasion. And what about that idea? I mean, Ukraine is holding on. They are short of equipment. They're short of troops. What about giving Putin a reason, giving him a reason to look for an exit? Would this not help towards that? And I think that noise might have been the familiar sound of a phone line going down just as we were getting to in mid of this, for me, fascinating conversation, and one with really a good deal of significance, depending on how this idea, this plan that Larissa Brown has been able to clue us up about, how that plays out. We're going to be talking about this story a little bit later on in the programme, as you would absolutely expect.